2024 coming to an end. And halfway through the year, we did an early contender for our albums of the year list. And now that the end of the year is here, we've had a few more releases since then. We've had some more time to sit on some of our early picks. I'm curious to know if our lists are the same, if they've changed, where we're all at with these lists. But this episode is going to be the highly anticipated Albums of the Year episode.
Yes, sir. I feel like the front half of this year was pretty stacked. Only like a few releases in the back half have really caught my attention as much as ones from the first half. So I imagine my 6-month list, there'll be some that remain on there for this one.
And I want to go back, especially if you engaged with that mid-year episode and you left a comment with what your album of the year was 6 months ago. What has changed? What album do you choose now? So please remember to subscribe, follow, and leave a comment. Let us know what your album of the year will be, what your top 8 albums are. Please, please, please remember.
Right now, before you even hear our list, go do that. Right
yes,
now.
Don't let us influence you. We're not influencers, okay? We're content creators and podcasters. So one thing that I want to do for this episode, because there are just so many albums to choose from this year, is I want to run through, so we don't have any honorable mentions. I want to run through every single album that we will be choosing from.
Okay.
And so you'll know our pool of albums that we were looking at, and then you'll see how we ranked them after. Does that sound good?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
You want to go first?
Yes. So these are the albums that I am choosing from for Album of the Year 2024. Cliff Diver, Birdwatching. State Champs, Self-Titled. Drug Church, Prude. Sum 41, Heaven and Hell. Microwave, Let's Start Degeneracy. 21 Pilots, Clancy. Real Friends, Blue Hour. Neck Deep, Self-Titled. The Story So Far, I Want to Disappear. Origami Angel, Feeling Not Found. Riley, Keep Your Cool. Aaron West and the Roaring Twenties, In Lieu of Flowers. Carpool, My Life in Subtitles. Carly Cosgrove, The Cleanest of Houses Are Empty. Bring Me the Horizon, Next Gen. Knocked Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to. Linkin Park, From Zero. Analysis Paralysis by 4 Year Strong. And that's all of the albums
Love it.
that I'm going to be choosing from when making this top 8 list for this episode.
I've got a lot of similar and a lot that you don't have. So
let's see what you're choosing from.
Okay, my list, Neck Deep, Self-Titled. 4 Year Strong, Analysis Paralysis. Knock Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to. Single Wound, Death is a Kindness. Nothing Nowhere, Dark Magic. State Champs, Self-Titled. Suicide Boys, New World Depression. Bring Me the Horizon, Posthuman Next Gen. 7 Hours After Violet, Self-Titled. Eminem, The Death of Slim Shady. Bloom, Maybe in Another Life. Crossfaith, Arc. See You Space Cowboy, Coup de Grace. Imminence, The Black. Poppy, Negative Spaces. Linkin Park, From Zero. Halsey, The Great Impersonator. Real Friends, Blue Hour. Throne, Excessive Guilt. Awaken Providence, I Write to You, My Darling Decay. Diamond Construct, Angel Killer Zero. Boundaries, Death is Little More. And Void of Vision, What I'll Leave Behind.
There were 2 that you mentioned on there that I'm like, maybe I should have considered them. But I think in that list, I was like, I knew that they weren't going to make my top 8. So I didn't put them up for consideration.
Which 2?
Poppy's album.
Okay.
It's a new album. And like I said, I like half of the album. And See You Space Cowboy, I really, really enjoyed over the summer.
Yeah.
But I knew that it wouldn't make my top 8.
Okay. That's fair.
So I didn't put that in the grand list, but it was a fantastic release for this year.
I think there's some notable ones that neither of us had that I'm surprised. I think people will be surprised that I didn't have like the new Make Them Suffer record, the Era record that came out this year. There was some metalcore records that I just like really wasn't feeling this year. And I think we'll talk about why once we get into this albums of the year list.
I'm actually really surprised that you're considering the Eminem record.
Oh, really? Okay, so I noted it here because for about 2 weeks after that record came out, I became re-obsessed with Eminem and I went back and listened to like his entire discography. And I was like, okay, the fact that this album could cause that, I'm gonna put it here just to kind of name drop it. Spoiler alert, it didn't actually make my topic.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, like, this album was one of those things where you kind of listen to just out of curiosity, and you're like, oh,
this is the
okay.
For me, this was the best Eminem record since the Marshall Mathers LP2 that came out in like 2013 or something like that.
See, I disagree. I listened to this one and I was like, oh, okay, this album feels like a novelty. And you
Playlist that I add every single record I listen to. Right now, it's at 1,766 songs, 97 hours of music. And whenever I'm like really feeling, I'll add it to like the end of the playlist. But if I'm feeling the record, I'll move it up towards the top so I don't have to scroll as far. I moved this one up, so I was like, it was in contention at some point.
Okay.
So, yeah, wanted to mention it at least.
Okay, yeah. And
Judge me as you will for Eminem, but you know what? He put out a decent album in 2024.
I'm not an Eminem hater either, and he released a couple of albums that everyone thought were flops at the time that I really enjoyed, or people just kind of
Music to be Murdered by, Kamikaze. I feel like we're all like strongly
Kamikaze,
overlooked.
I think was the one that I really really liked.
Revival, and it sucked, but the other ones deserve more attention.
Revival, what was on? Yeah, Revival. I wasn't the craziest about, but I liked Kamikaze.
Music to be Murdered by is pretty good too. The B-sides edition is even better.
Mm-hmm.
The whatever they called it. Oh yeah, side B. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not an Eminem hater. In fact, I love Eminem, especially his old stuff.
Oh yeah.
Especially the
Marshall Mathers LP
era as well. Those were big for me, like in that part of like high school and stuff. He was releasing music towards, when
I think Eminem might make my Spotify Wrap just because like his discography is so deep and I listened to it probably 2 or 3 times in full.
Okay.
So that was like it was like 3 days of listening 2 or 3 times just because it's so long. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why we're giving so much attention to Eminem right now, but
it surprised me that it made your list. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that before we get into our top 8 lists of album of the year, because it was obviously an album that was released this year. And it was one of those notable releases, I guess, that I forgot about because I wasn't a fan of it.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
So let's we don't need to be the full emo and metalcore podcast.
I have one record that is not emo. Well, it's kind of emo, but it's
Halsey.
it's not Halsey, but it's not metal, it's not pop punk, it's not.
Oh, okay. So, he has a polka record on here.
I do actually. I had 2 of them in my 6-month.
2 polka records.
No, Jesus Christ. 2 non-metal, like pop punk leaning albums in my 6 months. So,
all right, breaking news: TJ loves polka.
You want to get into your number 8?
Yeah, let's go into my. Actually, before we get into our lists for the end of the year, I wanted to get into what a recap of what our lists were halfway through the year, so we can see.
Oh, do you want to go through that?
Yeah, let's start off with that. So, why don't you tell us where we were 6 months ago?
Okay, so for comparison's sake. Carpool, Riley, Knocked Loose, Bring Me the Horizon.
Okay.
My list was Suicide Boys, Imminence, Single Wound, Nothing Nowhere, Boundaries, Neck Deep, Knocked Loose, Bring Me the Horizon.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know. Well, now I know what is going to be different, what dropped off of my list, what moved on my list, what stayed the same. So I'm really excited to get into this and to hear what changed for you as well, especially with new albums coming out in that time, and now with more time on the actual with the actual albums.
This was fun for me too, because like with writing my thesis and finally getting that like approved and out of the way, I really wasn't listening to music for the last like 2 months or so. So to be able to kind of come back to all these records with fresh ears and be like, oh yeah, I remember why I love this one so much. I was able to really say like, oh yeah, this is better than this. And so it was good.
It was also kind of a weird year for me that way too, where like I went through an audiobook phase where I did nothing but listen to audiobooks, because Spotify added audiobooks, and I was like, I do a lot of driving. So I was like, I'll throw on a book instead of music. Sometimes that helps when you're sitting in bumper to bumper traffic. It helps pass the time and not think about the fact that you want to murder the person in front of you. Whereas like music, sometimes it amps you up and makes you want to murder them more.
Yep.
I should probably bleep this out too. We're going to get canceled on YouTube.
Yeah, you can't really say on YouTube.
So we're just going to politely unalive someone. That's what I meant to say. That's what the beeps are for.
Road rage is real, folks.
Yeah.
We've all been through it.
So these are the albums that helped cure my road rage.
I don't know, if you get a heavy album, it almost makes me it makes it worse for me.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I went through the You know, it's like you're stuck in bumper to bumper traffic. You could put on an audiobook or the Knock Loose record. Which one's going to calm you down more?
I see what you're saying now. Yes, for sure.
So I went through my audiobook phase, but at the same time, a lot of music listened to this year. And number 8 on my list is going to be Riley's Keep Your Cool.
Okay.
This is one of those albums that stuck with me.
So this came down from number 3 of the 6-month mark down to number 8.
It did.
Keeping track.
Yeah. So Riley's Keep Your Cool is one of those albums. It's kind of got that fun pop punk mixed with some post-hardcore elements, some screaming and some catchy tunes in there that when you're looking for something, it was just an easy press play on this record. They're a newer up and coming band as well. I really, really like them. So go and check them out if you haven't already. They're number 8 on my list. And a lot of the things that I said in that 6-month episode, that 6-month mark, still stand. Super catchy, fun album, but you know, the more the year went on, the less I listened to it, but it was still an easy, you know, throw the record on. I have it on vinyl or press play on Spotify when you don't know what to listen to.
It's a good pick. My number 8, the latest addition that you could possibly have to this list, same as my Songs of the Year list, which you haven't heard that episode, go back and listen to that right now. Negative Spaces by Poppy.
I kind of had a feeling that's where you were going.
I love it. Yeah, I was really looking forward to this record with all the singles that dropped because they were really hyping it up, balancing like heavy and accessible. The problem with this record is it dropped the same day as Linkin Park, and I could not pull myself away from Linkin Park to listen to this that much, where I think if I spent a bit more time, it might be even higher. But it's diversity on here. Like you're not sacrificing any of the heaviness, but it feels like justified and organic. Like that's what it feels like here to me. It's not just like an onslaught of heavy just to be heavy. She's doing everything that like she's done in the past and kind of like paying tribute to things that we had heard from Poppy before. I do enjoy tracks like Yesterday leading into like Crystallize and some of those like poppier moments that bring some brevity to the aggressiveness. It's kind of that like Halsey, Charlie XCX kind of like hyper poppy pop mixed with aggression, which is like I can get it in like doses and then come back to like a pop loose kind of
like,
song.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like Brat Summer.
Yes.
X Knock Loose.
Yeah, we're like I listened to the Charlie XCX record and I was like, I can't do this for an entire record. I'll pick a couple of good songs and it's whatever. But this is so cool because it's like you get a taste of this, you get a taste of that all in one project. And I think you'll find throughout my entire list, I really put an emphasis on genre fusion and variety or diversity in a record, unless if you're doing that one sound perfectly. So that's why this one is at number 8.
And I agree with you on I like the variety and I like the mix up and the change up within a record. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode. That Poppy record didn't make my list. It didn't even go into consideration because I've only listened to it a few times now because I've been, like you, so obsessed with that Linkin Park album that Poppy got put on the back burner. And when I have listened to it, I really enjoy the heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But the Poppy stuff,
the highs are high and the lows are low for
exactly.
you. Yeah.
So there's definitely skips on that album. So
I think this one's going to stick with me for a while. So
I think I can go and take half of that album and put it on a playlist, and that half of the album can stick with me for a while.
For sure.
But album-wise, that's the big difference as a full album cohesively.
No, that's understandable. For sure.
But I respect your pick, of course. And Poppy's huge, and she had a huge year this year as well.
Massive year.
So we'll talk a little bit about that next episode. That's a little hint,
wink,
wink. That we don't really talk about just yet. That's a wait to see what next episode's all going to be about.
Number 7, what you got?
Number 7 for me, I think, is going to surprise you because it came up on, actually, I'm looking at my 6 month. Okay, maybe not. I had this one a little bit higher at the 6 month mark then. I thought that I didn't have it on the 6 month mark.
Okay.
I put the story so far, I want to disappear.
Okay, so move down one spot. That's
so
fine.
it moved down one spot, but in my heart, it moved up a spot. Okay. And that's just because new albums were introduced throughout the year that just really, really shined in the second half of the year. And that's why it kind of pushed a lot that I had on my list down. But the story so far, I Want to Disappear, is one of those albums that the more I listened to it, the better it got. It felt very full of emotion. It wasn't just a like pop punk record. You talked about diversity in the Poppy record. I felt like this was a side of Parker that we haven't seen too much within. It was a very emotional record. You've got that pop punk, you've got the emotion in there. And the more I sat with this, the more I listened to the words, the more this record became something even more special for me as a Story So Far project.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'm actually surprised this went down on my list. But like I said, it went up in my heart because I love this album way more now than I did 6 months ago.
Interesting. Okay. That's cool. It didn't stick with me. I tried to give it another listen or two after my first impressions. I don't know what it is.
And I'll preface this by saying, too, my first impressions were not good of this album. Like, I listened to this album with high hopes for it. And then when I got through it, I was like, ooh, it's didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
But I was like, let's just give it another shot and listen to it again. And the more I listened to it, the more it grew on me. And I think that some of the best records can also do that.
Oh, for sure.
Some of my favorite records, I wasn't a fan of the first listen. And then the more I sat with it, the better they got. And this is one of those ones where the more I sat with it, the more it became a really, really like deeply impactful album for me.
Okay, cool. Number 7 for me is a self-titled album from 7 Hours After Violet, which I don't think you've given them. I shouted them out on the side projects episode that we did recently because they kind of have been taking over my life. It's just to recap: Shavo from System of a Down, Michael Morgoth Montoya, who's like this wicked producer and the guitarist for Winds of Plague on guitar, and then Taylor Barber from Left to Suffer, who's like this sick deathcore band. So it's like merging new metal and deathcore, which I'd never really heard before. And I love both of those fucking genres. So this was like an innovation to me, and they nailed it for an entire record. So I just wanted to give them the shout out in that they're brand new. They deserve some attention. Definitely go listen to 7 Hours After Violet if you haven't heard them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should go and listen to them because I definitely have not.
Yeah, there's the big atmospheric moments. Taylor Barber can still get like those low gutturals in there when you're not expecting it, but it's really solid.
And number 6 for me is where I put 21 Pilots' Clancy.
I knew it was going to be here somewhere.
I didn't know. Did I have it on my list?
No, you didn't, because I don't think it had come out yet.
Okay. So Clancy had to make it on my list because of what we talked about last week in our songs. My Blood was my first dance song with my wife at the wedding, and Clancy came out not long before we got married in California. So our entire time in California was listening to Trench and Clancy. And those are the two albums that we just had. It was Trench, Clancy, and Bring Me the Horizons album, which she agreed to let me listen to.
It was the compromise.
Yeah, that was the compromise after we listened to Overcompensate 600 times.
Makes sense.
Then I got to listen to NA. So that was that was the compromise. But this album is one of those ones that I will always remember as that like portion in time, even if I don't listen to it much in 2025, which I don't know if I will or I won't. But anytime I press play on Clancy, it's going to take me back to that time of my life. And this is one of those albums that like is always going to be associated with a positive moment. So,
Yeah.
It's maybe not my favorite 21 Pilots album, but it definitely deserves to be on this list for the amount of times that I've listened to it this year,
That's a
whether
good
it
pick.
was against my will or not.
I don't know. Similar to the story so far, 21 Pilots fell off so hard for me after like Vessel and
Scaled and Icy was terrible.
Yeah.
Like I can't listen to that.
And I know that
record.
this was like a big comeback for them in a lot of people's eyes. It was like fine. I feel like I've just kind of moved past 21 Pilots at this
That's
point,
fair.
but I love that it's like here for you and you've had that, you can associate this time in your life with that record because I love shit like that.
Yeah.
Halsey's Manic record was my number one record of the year because, again, I listened to so much heavy music that one just kind of like stuck with me. Similar here. It lyrically, there's some like really powerful moments that really just resonate with me. There's a lot of like trauma in this record. Like there's one line that always stuck with me. I can't remember the exact line, but it was like working on my inner child. The motherfucker's been dead since 5. I was like, I don't know why, but that always just stuck with me. So it gets like really emotional, but the instrumentals are also like massive, booming, like rattle your skull in the best way possible. So whenever I wasn't feeling Knock Loose or like anything else, I was going to this record and I love it.
It was a very big, heavy year.
It was. It was a big year for heavy music in general. Some major W's for heavy music this year.
Because there was also a lot of amazing heavy EPs that were released where if they were just an album, then they would have been on my list. Like the Plot and You releasing 3 EPs this year. If they just released all of those songs and called it an album, that would be a top 3 album for me.
I know. The thing I was talking about on Songs of the Year too, that deathcore band Disembodied Tyrant put out 2 separate EPs. I was like, if you just package these into a record, you would be here easily. It would be probably in my top 3 or 4, to be honest.
Heavy music, definitely. Yeah. 2024 was the year of heavy music, as I also only have 1 or 2 heavy bands on this. But
you're more leaning towards the pop punk and emo side of things to be in with, though.
Yeah, but also like in terms of the heavy stuff, like I definitely love it. It's just a matter of the releases. And there weren't a lot of albums from start to finish that were released for the heavy side of things that I really wanted to like put on this list. But like I said, a lot of huge heavy singles and EPs, and I have that big the heavy AF playlist that I made that I also asked you to like throw some stuff on so I can discover some new stuff. Like that was on repeat for a good portion of the year, and I still go back to that playlist now and just throw it on. And it's very heavy on like the Plot and You, See Space Cowboy, and all these, heavier bands with huge releases this year, or going back to a few. I mean, Killswitch Engage released a single last week.
What'd you think of it?
I love it.
Oh, really?
It sent me back, and I went to go and listen to The End of Heartache all over again. And it brought me back into Killswitch again, right? Wow, like okay. I think if we're like on this topic of heavy bands and getting kind of sidetracked here, I think that Killswitch is probably the metalcore band of like the mid 2000s for me.
That's fair. I think they were one of like the pivotal bands in kickstarting the genre or getting
Yeah.
mass appeal to the genre.
They're the only band I've actually participated in a Wall of Death for.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I think actually maybe Lamb of God at like a Warp Tour or something like that when I went with my friends and they were doing a Wall of Death and I was just
I
like,
couldn't tell
fuck
you
it,
what the
let's do
first.
it.
Yeah, I
But,
couldn't tell you what the first one for me was.
but Killswitch Engage was definitely that band for me. So yeah,
They'd be high on your most anticipated list for 2025 then.
for sure, and we'll get into that early next year.
Early next year, yeah.
That was one of our first episodes for this year as we got the podcast started, was like our anticipation and what we were guessing, and we totally called A Day to Remember
Coming back and dropping some singles, yeah.
Okay, so number 5 for me, I have Aaron West, In Lieu of Flowers.
This has moved up because this was your number 8 at the 6-month mark.
The more this album has sat with me, the more I'm like, I want to put it towards the top and it climbs up. And like in my heart, this is a number 1 record, but like it's that perfect album for when you just want something that's so fucking emo, but like emo mixed with like folky. It's that sad acoustic comfort album that also has some like horns and some big orchestrated choruses, and it's just such an amazing emotional musical masterpiece that I think I'll forever be going back and listening to. And I'm a huge fan of the Wonder Years, and I'm a huge fan of just like Dan's voice and songwriting, vocal style, like all of that. So this side project is also one of those things where I'm just a massive fan of. And the only reason why it's not higher is because you need to be in the mood for this album. But man, when you're in the mood, it just tickles that brain. That's like that part of the back of your brain.
Gotcha. Good pick. I'm not surprised that it's there for you. My number 5 is Arc by Crossfaith. I'm assuming you didn't listen to this?
No.
Crossfaith they haven't been around for a little bit. They had an EP in 2020, but they haven't had a full record since 2018. And I remember it being like just kind of meh on that album, but they've always been a really electronic influenced metalcore band. Kind of similar to like the Bring Me the Horizon record from this year, but not as hyper poppy, more just like those straight electronic influences. But yeah, this is super solid. They have some very punky drum sections, some atmospheric, grandiose type moments, but it all keeps coming back to this like ferocious metalcore sound that made me love them in the first place. So this was like a strong return to form, and it was kind of like I wasn't anticipating this record whatsoever, so I think it caught me off guard, and why it's on the list now.
Yeah, we have totally different lists.
I know.
I was like gonna say like let's do a combined top 8 list for this one and go with the top 8, but I feel like our lists are so
I think we're gonna start to come together towards the top. But yeah, it's so hard because I want to say my top 4 were immediate locks. I was like 100% these are confirmed. My 5 to 15, I was like, honestly, on a given day, 10 can go to 6 and 6 can go to fucking 14.
That's
like
just it.
It's hard.
I can have some of these honorable mentions that I mentioned before. Many times I've spun it throughout the year and how much it still resonated with me, where I can go back and still listen to it, because some albums, they came out, I listened to them a whole bunch when they first came out, and then as the months passed, I slowly started to forget about that album or play it less. Which one of those albums, before we kind of move on for me, and it's probably going to be on your list. I know it was on your 6-point list, your 6-month list. It's an honorable mention for me, and it didn't make it going forward, spoiler alert, but Neck Deep's album. And so that reaction.
You want to just let's just talk about it. That's my number 4. So if we were having this discussion,
perfect. So we're gonna swap. Because I was gonna lead into my number 4, but Neck Deep, the reason why it didn't make my list for me is because it came out in the beginning of the year, and I'm like, oh, this is a really good pop punk album, and I really like every single song on the album. But after a few months went by, I stopped listening to it. And then I just went back to Life's Not Out to Get You, and Life's Not Out to Get You probably got the most spins for me this year for like a good portion of the year from start to finish. So that might even be a number one album of the year for me in terms of the amount of times I've
You
listened to
consumed
that.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. And that I just revisited that album so many times this year, and Gold Steps really became like a hype up song when I was going into work or whatever, like wanted to get something done, that I've listened to Life's Not Out to Get You more this year than probably the last 5 years combined. Like that's how much I listen. So this album, Self-Titled, got me back into their best album, but the Self-Titled album itself kind of got lost in January to March.
Damn, that's crazy. This is my second favorite Neck Deep record of all time.
Okay.
Like right behind Life's Not Out to Get You, because I heard this for the first time and it harkened back to Life's Not Out to Get You so much for me. Like I really wasn't sure why they called it, self-titled. Like, when a band puts out a self-titled record after they have, 5 or 6 records out, it's like, okay, why would what is the re-innovation? Or it wasn't really an innovation for me. It was like, this is 100% authentically what Neck Deep stands for and the music we want to be remembered for.
I think I heard an interview with Ben Barlow talking about this record. I don't remember who he done the interview with, but he essentially said, like, with the other records, they experimented with and all of that, and maybe they got a little bit of flack for changing their sound and wanted to like experiment and do some different things, which some bands get. I don't agree with it, but whether you agree with it or not, he kind of mentioned that this album is kind of getting back to that pop punk basics, where it's kind of like,
back to the roots.
Yeah, it's okay to be known for this sound and do this one thing really, really well.
Yeah.
As long as you're continuing to grow and do those things really, really well. That was the point that I had taken away from listening to that podcast or whatever I listened to when this album had come out. And so I respect that. I totally respect that. But I just think that Life's Not Out to Get You just does it so good that I listen to this album and then I go, okay, yeah, I want more Neck Deep, so let's go back to Life's Not Out to Get You. And that's the album for me, That's
fair. When you have that anchor, it's tough to remove that, And a couple more words on this. Top tier modern pop punk record, and it hits so hard in a live setting. Like, I saw Neck Deep at When We Were Young and they played Life's Not Out to Get You in full, and that was such a great experience. But they were here in Toronto 6 days later, and I was like, I still have to go to this because this record is so good. I need to hear some of these songs live. Heartbreak of the Century may be my favorite pop punk song I've heard in 10 years.
Oh, wow.
It's like, I get so hyped listening to the song. And even outside of like the standard pop punk anthems, songs like Take Me With You or It Won't Be Like This Forever, they bring that kind of like emotion, but like in an uplifting and like joyful way. So I don't know. It's very high energy. It's very, I don't know. There's a lot of love in this record, and I think it comes through really well.
And I think that this record is all like, it's just a record filled with really, really, really good pop punk songs. So it's not even like I'm saying anything bad about the record.
Yeah.
Every single song's a really, really good pop punk song. But I think of, maybe I'm comparing it with like Neck Deep and The Story So Far a little bit too much as well in my brain, because those bands are kind of similar, associated. It's kind of like a Blink and a Green Day or a Blink and a Sum 41. Okay, it's kind of that in my brain.
They're like the modern equivalent of Blink and Green Day.
100%. Yeah. And so both of them released albums this year. And if I look back at them, I think when I listened to the Neck Deep album, my first impression was a lot better than the first time, my first impression of the Story So Far album. But the more I sat with both of them, because the Story So Far kind of has that dip and that variety and that, emotional side of things in there, whereas Neck Deep is just a really good pop punk record, but it all kind of blends together because it's all just like that same style of like those really good pop punk songs. That's where it's kind of like, I kind of wish that there was, more of a slow song or like a dip and a change in the album, instead of it just kind of being like all up here, like
I feel like they do have them a bit. Like there's some songs that start off like slower. Eventually it does usually pick up into like a pop punk chorus is the thing where you're probably coming from. Maybe a hot take here, but I think when we're looking back, like we get to like 2030 and we're thinking about the next decade, we're going to look back on Neck Deep Self-Titled as like the 2020s like Enema of the State for me. Like it's going to be like a core pop punk record.
Would that not be Life's Not Out to Get You?
No, because that's a 2010s record. I'm saying like if we look back at like for the 2020
Okay.
decade, it's gonna be the pop punk record for me.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident in that. It's so good. Yeah.
I think looking back, it'll definitely be looked at, fondly because it's just an album packed with really good pop punk songs. But
Okay.
the album itself didn't stick with me for the longer portion of the year.
Yeah.
And that's
I
why
think
it
if
didn't
this
make my
album
list.
came out right at the beginning of spring, you would have been more high on it.
Yeah, and I think that
Timing
it could be
was not
timing on
helpful in
the
this.
pop punk record because like pop punk in January, like buddy, I'm listening to modern baseball. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm listening to
I'm in my
Midwest
sad
emo
boy
when it's
era right
cold.
now. What do you mean? Yeah.
Like release that in the spring for the
Yeah.
summer. If it was 30 degrees Celsius or like 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, I'm jamming that on repeat with the windows down. And I think whereas when that temperature finally hit, I was listening to Life's Not Out to Get You.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So anyway, my 4 after all of that, my number 4 is the album that I was listening to with the windows down when it was 30 degrees on repeat. It is kind of another pop punk album, but with breakdowns. This is what I wish A Day to Remember still sounded like. Analysis Paralysis by 4 Year Strong.
Nice. Good pick. Yeah, it's a strong honorable mention for me, but it is a really good record.
This is one of those records where the first time I heard it, I'm like, damn, damn, damn. And every song had that like punch to it. I love that easy core sound with a pop punk with breakdowns. It's just every song on that album is just so catchy. They all flow right into one another.
Yeah.
And it's so easily digestible. It's just like a 1-2 punch. It's easy to digest. Once the album's over, you spin it again and boom, you're done. You know what I mean? Like It's just one after another after another.
They have a ton of energy in their music, especially in their live setting. Like I think their live performance almost comes through on this record really well because there's so much like power and like oomph in the music.
It's so easily digestible at any time for any mood. So that's why I put this album there.
Good pick.
What do you have at number 3? Now we swap positions.
My number 3, 100% not nostalgia coded. I can't believe they're back. From Zero, Linkin Park, baby.
Okay, we both have that at number 3.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, it's the 3rd best Linkin Park album, and it's the 3rd best album of the year.
Yeah, it was too new for me to put it any higher than 3 because I still need to sit on it. The other 2 records I've just been sitting on for longer, and they've kind of stuck with me. And I've been like, I can't take away from those 2 records, but this one is going to be a record I come back to for years, and I can't wait to see them next year. Holy shit. I put it above the Neck Deep record just because of diversity. Neck Deep put out 10 phenomenal pop punk songs, but Linkin Park put out like 3 or 4 really sick new metal songs, a couple of like songs that would have been on like 1,000 Suns, more of those like synthy kind of like alt rock music. So yeah, I love the replayability on this. Honestly, like the Emptiness Machine kicking off this whole thing, like I couldn't listen to Linkin Park for a couple like years after Chester died. And it wasn't only until like the last like year or so I've been starting to listen to them more, but I am so back on Linkin Park and it feels so good.
And Linkin Park is like a core band and a favorite band for you, right?
Such a core band. Holy, like they were I credit them as the band that got me into music. Like they were the first band I ever found and loved for myself. Like Hybrid Theory was my entry point into discovering music for myself.
And what about beyond Hybrid Theory and Meteora? Like everything between Meteora and From Zero, how do you feel about all of those albums?
Oh, I still like I will still listen to pretty much every era of Linkin Park consistently, except for One More Light. That was my strong, like, you guys went too far in like a way that like, I'm not going to listen to this on a daily basis.
Okay.
Everything else, like 1,000 Suns, one of my favorite Linkin Park records. Living Things, I think, is super underrated. It's got like the big singles, but I think other songs on that are still really solid. Hunting Party was like, okay, they went back to more of their like metal roots, but it sounds more like a rock album than it does like a new metal album. it's like I don't know, it's like Bring Me the Horizon, how they have different eras. Like they have deathcore Bring Me the Horizon, and they have metalcore Bring Me the Horizon, they have rock meteor, or they have rock Bring Me the Horizon. It's kind of the same for Linkin Park. So I like each of the different eras for different reasons. It's just like the new metal era is what got me into music. So I hold it to a higher esteem.
Yeah, see, and I think that's where
You
we
were more of
differ.
a strong dip after though.
I was Hybrid Theory and Meteora. Holy shit, this band is so good. To they released Minutes to Midnight. I was like, I'm out. Bye.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
leaving the room. I just, Bleed It Out and What I've Done were two huge singles that were on MTV, Much Music, the radio, that like now looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Those were good songs. But I just did not care for Linkin Park after that. I still went back to those first two albums and was like, they're incredible. And the reason why I never saw Linkin Park with Chester is because I knew that any moment beyond when I started going to concerts and got old enough to go and see Linkin Park, I was like, I don't want to pay this money to see Linkin Park and hear half of their set being anything beyond Hybrid Theory and Meteora. So that's why I'm like, now looking back, I'm like, I regret not going and hearing like even the little bits of Hybrid Theory and Meteora that I would have loved to hear.
Yeah.
But it was just like, I don't want to pay money for a ticket to hear the new stuff.
Yeah. For me,
Whereas
they have
now, like-
they have a perfect set list. Like they have the perfect singles from those newer records that they always play that I'm like, I know I'm going to hear these ones and I love these songs. And then everything else, like you can swap in and out songs from Hybrid Theory and Meteor as you seem fit, and I'm still going to be happy.
Yeah. See, whereas like I think even when we go and see them, there's going to be songs that I might not know because I just haven't given time to their records between.
You should go
Meteora
back and see how it like resonates now. Yeah.
I will. And
Especially if
see-
you're enjoying the songs on this one, to be like, oh, I can hear the influence now, like kind of like the way that they've put a modern spin on it.
And, when Chester died and One More Light was like the song surrounding that, I was like, oh my goodness, like I haven't listened to them in so long. I didn't even know this song was a thing until it was being used to commemorate him after all that. And it kind of became the mental health song. And I was like, shit, this song is beautiful. I love this.
Yeah, it is.
So, I think there's going to be a retrospective appreciation for their stuff between then and now. But I still think, with that being said, From Zero really perfectly touches on each era of Linkin Park and ushers them into a new era.
Yep.
And it perfectly honors Hybrid Theory and Meteora's eras as well, which I feel like the band kind of got away from before Chester passed. And that's why I had that hard fall off. And that's why I think From Zero is their third best album, because they kind of go back to that core of what made us all fall in love with them back in 2004, 2005 anyway.
Exactly. Obviously, this inclusion is like skewed, me thinking that they were never going to put out music again. But it was an easy slot at number 3. I just couldn't put it at 2 or 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I would be totally fine if they never released music again because of everything that I just said. But the fact
I know
that
they're already going back into the studio to do more music next year.
Yeah, the fact that they pulled in Emily, who, we were all a little bit hesitant to hear, what a new singer with Linkin Park would sound like. And they did it so perfectly. And I think we touched upon this on the Linkin Park episode, but like, this could have gone so wrong and it just went so well. So, and this album, it only came out 2 weeks before we recorded this episode, and I've spun it so many times. I would be shocked if it didn't end up being one of my most spun albums of the year, being released in the last couple of months of the year. It's just been on repeat since then. And maybe if we had it longer, it would have taken a 1 or 2 spot, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Who knows? So what do you have at number 2?
You want to do your number 2 since I just said number 3? And
I think our number 1 and 2 are probably going to be the same.
Oh, we might be the exact same 3, 2, 1, to be honest.
Yeah, so we'll have an easy top 3 list of all time, and then everything after that is going to be opinion based.
Debate on we had these 2 albums. I'm assuming you have these 2 albums in our 1 and 2 spot at the 6-month mark. What is going to be your number 2? Is it going to be the same?
So I put Knocked Loose at number 2 and Bring Me the Horizon at number 1.
Same. Yeah, it was the exact same as the 6-month mark. You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to. Near perfect. Heavy record clearly has a stranglehold on the heavy music community in general. Just bringing like a massive win for heavy music in general. Like they're getting so much attention. They played like they were getting some attention before. They were on the up and up. They played like Coachella, I think.
Yep.
Absolutely insane set. And I was worried that with their next record, they were going to sacrifice some heaviness to try to keep that mainstream attention. They fucking doubled down on it. They're
said,
like,
fuck that.
fuck that. Oh my God. It's insanely heavy. They did the exact opposite. They're now Grammy nominated. Later this week, they're playing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, which is absolutely insane. It's the year of Knock Loose.
It really is the year of Knock Loose. And this is also one of those heavy albums that you can actually listen to from start to finish. And it's so cohesive, but it's so short that like it doesn't overstay its welcome.
Exactly. That was my big difference between like the Knock Loose record and the Boundaries record. The Boundaries record is just a bit longer and there's not enough like moments in there to break up the heaviness. Whereas this, you get that like A24 creepy horror aspect into like the little where there's no instrumentation and you're like, okay, it's kind of like world building and it's just, it all adds to the atmosphere of the record, which is so cool.
And we've had this discussion on several episodes. I'm definitely a pop culture guy. This is my second favorite release from Knock Loose outside of pop culture. Like normally when I go to Knock Loose, I go immediately to pop culture, press play, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah.
But this year, I didn't listen to pop culture that much because every single time I wanted something heavy or I wanted Knocked Loose, I just threw on this album and listened to it from start to finish.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so short that you can do that, right? Like 28 minutes, you can an hour drive and you're spinning it twice in full.
It's a perfect record. And then Bring Me the Horizon.
I was going to say the main difference that set apart these two records is that I find with the Bring Me record, I can pull out any of those songs and add them to an individual playlist. They're all single worthy. Whereas this one, there's the big singles. And then the other songs, I only want to listen to the context of the record. So it's like
Knock Loose.
Yeah. So I think that's where like, and maybe that speaks to the quality of the production of the record as a complete project. And maybe it should be a number one. But in terms
as a
of like,
record.
Yeah. The appreciation for the songs, I just put Bring Me the Horizon a bit higher. And there's also more diversity there for me to chew on.
Here's the reason why I put, Bring Me over Knock Loose. It's because I can, no matter what mood I'm in, I can put on the Bring Me record and listen to it. If I'm sad, if I'm happy, if I'm having a good day, a bad day, whatever, I can put on Bring Me and there's just more that I can listen to. Whereas like Knock Loose, yeah, I can listen to it on any other day, but there's just some days where I'm not in the mood for like just absolute nonstop screaming and smashing of drums. When you're in the mood for it, it's the perfect record. But when you're not, it's like, the Bring Me album kind of fills in that gap. And the thing about the Bring Me album, and the reason why I love it so much, and the reason why it's my album of the year, is that they basically took every sound that worked over the course of every Bring Me the Horizon era and the 2000s, and they perfectly put it all into one record in a way that wasn't corny. And I love when bands can take that risk of like, hey, we can take this nostalgic sound. It can go so wrong and kind of be like, they're just trying to copy the sound from the 2000s and it's phony, it's fake. They're trying to like do something that they're not, or they're trying to bring something else back in without making like a new original clever way of doing it. They took everything that was good about that 2000s era and everything that was good about past Bring Me eras and perfectly put it into like a 45-minute record that didn't overstay its welcome. And it was perfect.
And say Matt's preaching right now. The number one note that I had was they're not trying to replicate or be someone else. They take influences and put their classic BMTH branding on it. Like they make it inherently Bring Me the Horizon, even though, they get like some influence from nu metal and some from like the early 2000s post-hardcore and that Under Oath song especially.
Even some of like the pop stuff, like you can kind of hear a lot of that, like the pop artists that played Warped Tour type of era that were associated with the scene mixed with the deathcore shit, and like just mixing everything together and all of those sounds from the 2000s into one cohesive record and doing it in a way that isn't cheesy, and it's also still, it feels nostalgic, but it also feels new.
It's like it does feel nostalgic and new. It's that like they've kind of have that innovation of rooting everything in that like hyper pop core that they've been doing, which I don't know if they're like the first band to do it, but it feels like every single Oh my, they're exactly the same as something you'd hear on this record.
Hilarious.
It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, similar to Linkin Park, like you said, kind of embracing aspects of their past, but rooted in like innovation, which is so cool. So like paying tribute, but making it fresh and easy to consume. Like I said, I took a bit of a break from music for the last little bit, and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna go back to this. It's gonna be as good as I remember, and it was. Like it's so good. Like the first half of this record is stacked with Utopia, Kool-Aid, Top 10 Statues, Limousine, Dark Side, A Bullet. And I'm like, that's a perfect 6-track run right there. It can't get any better. And then you get like the little
Can't get any better. And then the three next songs are my favorite 3 songs on an album to like flow into each other for the year. NA into Lost into Strangers is literally where I was starting the album majority of the times. I would just start it at NA. If you listen to the singles episode, you'd know this.
Yep.
NA into Lost into Strangers, and then I'd go second half of the album into the first half.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and then the second half is just as good, if not better, than the front half. And you're like, wait, how is this even possible? Like you can start at halfway through, and then start at the beginning, and it works just as perfectly. The interludes, I know you're like,
I'm not a fan of the interludes. That's where this album loses me is the interludes, but it's a quick skip.
I mean, for sure, I think it adds a ton of world building in this whole like post-apocalyptic sound that they're trying to create. I think it's super cool. The whole world being taken over by this AI, whatever personality. I think it's just so cool. They have a theme. It's cohesive. It all works towards that. It's a great record.
Yeah. And and once again, I just really want to hit on the fact that like, I think when it comes to me, what really, really gets me when it comes to music and my favorite feeling is like, that nostalgia feeling for something I've never experienced.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, this is like, I feel nostalgic for something that I didn't experience, which is really, really weird. And I think that's why my favorite band I've mentioned on the podcast too is the Gaslight Anthem. And I heard someone describe the Gaslight Anthem of I feel nostalgic for a time that I never lived through. Because like the stories that they do is like through like, you know, drive-in movie theaters, classic cars, like all these retro things that like I never experienced, but like I feel nostalgic for it.
It's like an emotionality or like a tone that you resonate with, no matter what the subject matter is.
And it's that storytelling and all of that. And that's what this does. It makes me nostalgic for the 2000s. Even though I lived through the 2000s, it was like I didn't experience this in the 2000s because they accurately took little pieces of everything and built it into their own new world. So I think that this is going to be one of those albums that in 10, 20 years from now, everyone looks back at and is nostalgic for this album.
For sure.
So I think that's why it's such a crazy album. And what a year. But it's cool that we were on the same page for the top 3.
Yeah, going back to it, I was just like, it's undeniable. Like, I've always been a bigger Bring Me the Horizon fan than a Knock Loose fan, so I think that kind of plays into it a little bit.
And see, whereas I've always been a bigger Knock Loose fan than Bring Me.
Yeah, this is surprising for me that you had it above Knock Loose.
This year was almost like the Bring Me year for me because I listened to a lot of Bring Me the Horizon this year, not just this album, but going back to Sempiternal and That's the Spirit, and just like going through the different eras of Bring Me. Like I heavily got into Bring Me the Horizon this year, and I think it's because of this album. Whereas I was already into Knocked Loose, and this just made me love Knocked Loose even more.
Fair enough. Yep.
You know?
New appreciation.
So that's our list. Top 8 albums of 2024. I still can't believe that 2024 is almost over.
I know.
Please let us know, now that we've gotten to it, what are your favorite albums of the year? What albums didn't we mention that we should check out that are maybe on your list that are your favorite? Please let us know in the comments on YouTube. Send us a message or leave a comment on our Instagram page. Please rate and review the show on Apple or leave a comment and follow on Spotify. These all go a long way. We're really looking forward to getting into 2025 and coming out a lot stronger. But of course, it always helps when you actually click that subscribe and follow button. So please follow along. And next week,
the very last episode of the top 8 of 2024, the 2024 Wrapped. We're doing a bunch of like award type categories. It's going to be really fun to count down some of our favorite picks and some other things that happened this year.
Yeah, it's going to be like 8 categories, kind of like, Artist of the Year, Album of the Year, that type of thing. And we're going to run through 8 of those and kind of wrap up who really had the biggest impact on the scene in different capacities for the year of 2024. So I'm really excited to do something really different in next week's episode. So make sure you really hit that subscribe and follow button for that episode so you get a notification when it's out.
And we will see you next week.